Hello, wonderful staff of the Kent Northwest Kidney Center Dallas Unit. It's time for the March 2021 edition of the Kent Monthly In-Service. I appreciate you taking the time to hopefully expand your fund of knowledge, of course, with the goal of providing better care to our patients. So this month we're going to discuss the safety of the COVID vaccines. A day doesn't go by without someone asking me about this topic, and I'm sure you all have been asked about this as well by our patients. It's good to have some knowledge about the vaccines so that you can answer our patients' questions. So we are very fortunate to see a decline in new COVID-19 cases in Washington State. This graph here shows hospitalization counts sharply declining in February and March of this year. It is a success story with many credits due, including all the safety precautions, the PPE, the social distancing, and more recently, vaccine administration. The availability of a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine is a major development in the coronavirus pandemic. An effective vaccine helps people who come into contact with the virus from becoming sick, and as more people become vaccinated, families and communities will be able to gradually return to a normal routine. Out of a population of about 7.6 million in the state, we've administered 2.6 million doses, and as of 3 days ago, so March 19th, we have about 976,000 people, or 13% of the population, who are fully vaccinated, and we have about 1.7 million, or 21% of the population, who have been partially vaccinated. So the vaccines appear to be working well, although there are several unanswered questions. How well will they work against virus mutants or variants? How long will the immunity imparted by the vaccines last? Is it 1 season? Is it 3 years? We don't know that. And finally, most importantly, are the vaccines safe both in the short and in the long run? Today we're going to focus on vaccine safety. Part of the concern for safety comes from the fact that two of the vaccines, the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, use new vaccine technology, specifically mRNA technology in their development. But another area of concern relates to the speed with which the vaccines were developed and received FDA approval. Currently in the US, 3 vaccines have received FDA approval: Pfizer, Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and a 4th, the Oxford Astrazeneca vaccine, is expected to receive FDA approval next month. All of these received emergency FDA authorization on the basis of essentially a 2-month trial, so 2 months of data. And is 2 months of data sufficient? Essentially, are we guinea pigs for new technology that ultimately may prove to be unsafe? There are 3 objectives to today's talk. We'll review the available vaccines. We'll discuss some of the reasons why people are choosing not to become vaccinated. And finally, we'll review common as well as rare adverse side effects of each vaccine. In the US, we currently have 3 vaccines available: Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. And as I mentioned earlier, the Astrazeneca vaccine will likely become FDA approved next month. The Pfizer vaccine is based on mRNA technology. Basically, it's a messenger RNA vaccine containing the genetic code for the spike protein on the COVID-19 virus surface. It's directly injected into humans rather than into cells in a lab, and so your own cells end up becoming a factory for your own vaccine. It has demonstrated 95% effectiveness in preventing symptomatic COVID-19 infection. It's received FDA emergency use authorization, and it's more than 89% effective in preventing COVID-19 infection among people with health problems such as diabetes, obesity, or kidney disease. It doesn't contain eggs, latex, or preservatives. It's administered as 2 doses separated by 21 days, and it's been FDA approved for people above the age of 16 years. The Moderna vaccine is also an mRNA vaccine. It's demonstrated effectiveness is 94% in preventing symptomatic COVID-19 infection, is greater than 90% effectiveness in preventing infection among people with health conditions, again, diabetes, obesity, kidney disease. Also does not use eggs, latex, or preservatives. It's 2 doses separated by 28 days, and it's authorized for people above the age of 18 years, although studies in minors are ongoing. The Johnson & Johnson virus vaccine is what we call a vector vaccine. This type of vaccine, the gene for a particular protein, in this case a surface spike protein, is cloned using recombinant technology, and then it's inserted into a modified viral vector. And then the virus is injected into a person, and then the human cells take up the virus, they make the virus surface protein, which triggers an immune response. The phase 3 study involved 44,000 people, 10 countries, ethnically diverse population, demonstrated it was very effective. 66% effective in preventing symptomatic COVID-19 infection, 85% effective in preventing severe COVID-19 infection. Received FDA emergency use authorization on February 27, 2021. Like the other vaccines, it doesn't contain eggs, latex, or preservatives. It has a huge advantage of only requiring 1 dose, and it's been authorized for people above the age of say 18 or older. The Oxford Astrazeneca vaccine, developed by Oxford University and manufactured by Astrazeneca, is an inactivated viral vaccine. Basically, it's combined with genetic material for the characteristic spike protein. It's administered as 2 doses separated by 28 days. Its efficacy was demonstrated in a randomized controlled trial in the UK and Brazil involving 23,000 people. Interesting, they found that 2 full doses spread 1 month apart were 62% effective in preventing symptomatic COVID infection. But if you gave the half dose of the vaccine followed by a full dose 1 month later, it was 90% effective. Why was a half dose given in the study? Well, because it was a mistake. About 2,500 patients were given the half dose because of nursing math error. The overall effectiveness in preventing symptomatic COVID-19 infection is 70%, and researchers are not sure why a half dose followed by a larger dose is more effective. There are relatively few contraindications to receiving these vaccines. For Pfizer and Moderna, people who have had an immediate or severe allergic reaction to any of the vaccine's ingredients, or if you had a bad reaction after the first dose, should not receive a second dose. Or if you've had an allergic reaction basically to any vaccine or injectable medicine in the past, you should be very cautious about receiving the vaccine. Regarding the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, again, same thing. If you've demonstrated an allergy to any of the vaccine's ingredients, in particular if you have an allergy to something called polysorbate. And polysorbates are included in the vaccine. They are oily liquids used to solubilize essential oils in water-based products. Despite the vaccine's efficacy, as well as very few contraindications to receiving them, many people do not feel comfortable accepting these vaccines. Despite the vaccine's efficacy as well as the absence of many contraindications, a lot of people don't want to receive the vaccine. This is a survey done in December 2020 by VP Data and Insights at Invisibly. And they found that of the 5,500 Americans surveyed, only about 53% were willing to receive the vaccine. And then they looked at factors that identified willingness to receive, and they identified trust, age, and race. And then they looked at a whole bunch of other factors that had no association with their willingness to receive it, including income, education, gender, or demographics. Interesting, a lot of medical professionals have declined to receive the vaccine. In Riverside, California, for example, up to 50% of some of the frontline healthcare workers and 20 to 40% in LA County refused to take the vaccine despite their medical education. So trust, of those who trust the vaccine to be safe and effective, 81% said they were willing to receive the vaccine. But of those who consider the vaccine to be untrustworthy, 80% said they were very unlikely to be vaccinated. Age was also a predictor of willingness to receive the vaccine. People most likely to receive it were above the age of 55 years, followed by the younger demographic of 18 to 24 years. 58% of those were willing to receive it, followed by middle-aged people 45 to 54 years of age, 50% willing to receive it, and then finally, age 25 to 44, 47% were willing to receive the vaccine. Race or ethnic background is another predictor of willingness to receive the vaccine. Caucasians are most likely to receive the vaccine, and people of color are most distrustful of the vaccine, thus least likely to receive it despite the higher incidence of COVID-19 in their communities. Of those who are unwilling to receive the vaccine, 53% are black, 50% are Hispanic, 48% are of other ethnic backgrounds, and only 38% are white. Vaccine acceptance also varies by state. The states where unvaccinated people were least likely to say they'd accept COVID-19 were Wyoming, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Alaska, and North Dakota, which are all sparsely populated or southern states. Washington, D.C. and states in the Northeast had some of the highest levels of vaccine acceptance. Generally, willingness to receive is higher in big cities. Anti-vaccine propaganda posted on the internet may be contributing to some people's unwillingness to receive the vaccine. There are social media giants, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram have started to crack down on anti-vaccine information over the past 6 months by removing accounts of those they feel are trying to disseminate negative or inaccurate information about the COVID-19 vaccine. And while their intentions may be noble and arguably may be good for society, they are censoring people based on their attitude towards the vaccine. Many Americans may accept the vaccine in the future, but not currently, and this refers to a concept called vaccine hesitancy. Essentially, it refers to a delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccines despite availability of vaccine services. And it's affected by many factors such as complacency, convenience, or confidence. Some 10% of the public perceives vaccines as unsafe or unnecessary or refuse vaccines at this time. And of course, since we're trying to achieve herd immunity, not allowing for a vaccine to be administered, even though it's available, can further the spread of COVID-19 outbreaks. Let's switch gears now and talk about side effects of the COVID-19 vaccines. As an aside, studying side effects of medication, including a vaccine, can be very difficult. For example, during a research study, if a subject develops an adverse symptom, such as a cough or fever, it gets recorded as a possible side effect. But just because you had a fever or a cough or a headache around the time of administering the vaccine doesn't mean that the vaccine was necessarily responsible. Here's another example. This woman won the lottery shortly after receiving her second hepatitis B vaccine. Was her win a side effect of the vaccine? Well, certainly not. So the first vaccine I'd like to discuss is one that has not yet been approved for use in the United States, although is expected to receive emergency FDA approval in April, so next month. It's currently approved for use in the UK, Argentina, India, and parts of the European Union, as well as Mexico. On September 6, 2020, the company paused its phase 3 trial to investigate a patient who developed a condition called transverse myelitis, which basically is dangerous inflammation of the spinal cord. Researchers subsequently determined that the incident was unrelated to the vaccine, and they resumed trials in most countries, although it did delay studies in the United States by another month until October 26th. More recently, on March 14th, 2021, 15 cases of deep vein thrombosis or clot and 22 cases of pulmonary embolism were reported among recipients of the Astrazeneca vaccine. A DVT is a deep vein thrombosis, which is basically a blood clot in a vein, most often in the legs, which has a potential to break free and travel to the lungs, causing a blockage, or what is known as a pulmonary embolism. Most of the blood clots were found among younger women, 55 years of age and less. And Because of this report, a number of European nations, including Germany, France, Italy, Denmark, and Sweden, subsequently suspended vaccine administration. So we know that blood clots have been observed to occur with greater frequency among those with COVID-19 infection. And there is concern that the vaccine or production of viral proteins may somehow increase the risk of blood clots. The problem is that blood clots are common. They occur for all sorts of reasons, such as travel and medications, such as birth control pills, trauma, cancer, among other causes. And it turns out that the incidence of blood clots in the study is actually similar to what is seen in the general population. So it does not appear that the vaccine itself increases the risk of blood clots beyond what is expected. But in Germany, there have been 7 cases of something called a cerebral vein thrombosis, or a blood clot in a vein in the brain, and 3 people have died. And based on that, the German's healthcare ministry said that the expected number of cases of cerebral vein thrombosis should have only been 1.4 based on the number of vaccine doses administered. And on the basis of that, they have stopped administering the COVID vaccine from Astrazeneca. Because of the concern for blood clots, use of the Astrazeneca vaccine has been placed on hold in Germany, France, Italy, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, Thailand, Ireland, and Latvia. On March 18th, the European Medicines Agency issued a statement saying that the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine likely outweigh the risks, and therefore some of the countries have announced that they will resume administration of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Common adverse reactions to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine include the following. Up to 50% of people develop injection site reactions, pain that typically lasts 2 days but can occur up to 7 days. Fatigue, headache, muscle pain in 33%, nausea in 14%, and 9% of patients have a fever after receiving the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Rare potential side effects of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine include ringing in the ears, or tinnitus. Out of the 40,000 patients in this randomized controlled trial, 6 developed ringing in their ears in the vaccine group compared to none in the placebo group. There's a slightly higher number of blood clots, 15 events among the vaccinated group versus 10 in the placebo group. And as of February 26, 1 patient had anaphylaxis, another one had a severe reaction, although the details weren't released. And finally, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine may increase the risk of a condition called Bell's palsy. Bell's palsy is an asymmetrical weakness or paralysis of the face. It is often temporary. There have been 2 vaccine recipients in the Johnson & Johnson clinical trial that developed Bell's palsy, but so did 2 in the placebo group, so felt to be unrelated. Common side effects associated with the administration of the Moderna vaccine include 92% of the patients with pain at the injection site, so you get a sore arm after you receive the vaccine. 68% of patients feel tired, 63% have a headache, 60% have muscle pain, 45% have joint pains, 43% with chills, 15% of patients with fever, and 11% of people develop swollen lymph nodes after the first shot, and 16% after the second shot. Interestingly, side effects were more severe among patients who had previously had the COVID-19 infection. Allergic reactions have occurred with the Moderna vaccine. On January 18th, basically the California officials halted the use of one particular batch of Moderna vaccine after a small cluster, less than 10 patients, developed allergic reactions that required medical attention. On March 8th, the Mass General Brigham Hospitals published a research letter in JAMA describing the incidence of allergic reactions. Basically, out of nearly 53,000 vaccinated people, 2.2% of patients who received the Moderna vaccine had an allergic reaction. Basically, hives, itching, rash, swelling, or wheezing. Of the first 7.5 million doses administered between December 14th and January 18th, there were 19 cases of something called anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is a severe allergic reaction which people develop circulatory collapse or significant difficulty breathing. And as a result of this, there's certain precautions that we take when we administer the Moderna vaccine. For example, we monitor patients for 15 to 30 minutes after receiving the vaccine. We don't administer a second shot if they have an immediate allergic reaction after the first, and we don't give it if they have an allergy to something called polysorbate or polyethylene glycol. So why does anaphylaxis occur? Well, we think it has to do with the component of the vaccine. Basically, both Moderna and Pfizer use a lipid-based nanoparticle carrier system that helps stabilize the mRNA. And the carrier system is further stabilized by polyethylene glycol. Basically prolongs the life of the vaccine. And some people can have allergic reactions to polyethylene glycol. 3 patients who received the Moderna vaccine in the phase C trial developed something called Bell's palsy, which I mentioned earlier. It's that unilateral facial weakness, which is hopefully temporary, although it can be permanent. And then if you look at all of the people in the phase 2 trials who received Pfizer and Moderna, there were nearly 40,000 vaccine recipients. There were 7 cases of Bell's palsy compared to only 1 in the placebo arm, suggestive that this might be a rare but real potential side effect of the mRNA vaccines. Pfizer vaccine has standard common symptoms including sore arm, basically pain at the injection site. 84% of patients, 63% have fatigue, 55% have a headache, 38% develop muscle pain, 32% of patients have chills, 23% joint pains, 14% of patients develop a fever, and interesting, unlike Moderna, only 0.3% of patients develop swollen lymph nodes. You can also have allergic reactions as with Moderna. Of the first 2 million doses, there were 86 non-anaphylactic reactions, and these included basically itchy skin, rash, scratchy throat, mild respiratory symptoms. 71% of those with allergic reactions happened within 15 minutes of the vaccine, and most of the people had a documented history of allergies or allergic reactions. There were 47 cases of anaphylaxis reported out of the first 9.9 million doses administered again between December 14th and January 18th. The precautions are the same as for Moderna. Basically, you got to watch people for 15 to 30 minutes. You don't give a second shot if they've had an immediate or allergic reaction. You don't give if they have an allergy to this carrier molecule, the polysorbate or polyethylene glycol. By the way, if you've got allergies to food or insects or latex or other common allergens, there's no contraindication from that standpoint to receiving the mRNA vaccines. We talked briefly about Bell's palsy with the Moderna. Again, they pooled data from the Moderna and the Pfizer phase 3 trials, and it appears to be a very rare but real association with mRNA vaccine use. Another rare potential side effect of the Pfizer vaccine is something called Idiopathic Thrombocytopenic Purpura, or ITP. On January 12th, there was a doctor in Florida who died 16 days after receiving the vaccine from a rare blood disorder, again, ITP. Interestingly, ITP has also occurred as a rare complication of the COVID-19 infection itself in both symptomatic and asymptomatic patients. So there may be some biologic plausibility to this. Both Pfizer and the CDC are investigating the case. There's no verdict on whether or not they think it's associated. Okay, so those are the main side effects associated with the vaccine. Let's look at the benefits, because you always have to weigh, the benefits versus the risks of any medication or vaccine. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is very effective in preventing severe COVID-19 infection. If you look at all the global data, so all the countries involved, basically it's about 67% effective in preventing severe COVID infection 14 days after the single dose vaccine. After 28 days, it was 66% effective. In the United States alone, it was about 86% effective against severe forms of the disease and offered strong protection against hospitalization and deaths. Against the COVID variants that we see, for example, in South Africa, it was 81.7% effective. Another variant in Brazil, it was 87.6% effective. There's some limitations to this data. It's less effective among high-risk patients. So if you're above the age of 60 and you have an underlying medical condition such as diabetes or kidney failure, it was only 42% effective. It's not been tested also in children under the age of 18 or in pregnant women. The Moderna vaccine. Again, it was studied in a large 30,000 strong randomized controlled trial. More than 7,000 participants were above the age of 65, many with comorbidities and many people of color. There were only 11 cases of symptomatic COVID infection in the Moderna group compared to 185. So the overall efficacy, 94.1%. It's 100% effective in preventing severe disease. There were 0 cases of severe disease in the vaccinated group compared to 30 in the placebo group. So it's a very effective vaccine. Pfizer vaccine is also very effective. Results were published in the New England Journal of Medicine in December of 2020. And out of a very large randomized controlled trial of 45,000 people at multiple international locations among a diverse population, 170 cases were seen in the placebo group versus only 8 in the vaccine group. Overall efficacy in preventing infection was 95%. The Astrazeneca study, also very effective. Results were published November 18th in the Lancet. Again, a study of 23,000 people in the UK and Brazil, diverse population. Overall efficacy was 70%. Remember that 2 full doses impart an efficacy of 62%, but if you gave a half dose followed by a full dose, it was 90% with an average of 70%. So as you all can see, the available vaccines are extremely effective in preventing COVID-19 infections. They're also extremely safe. So we went through the different side effects that you can have with these vaccines, but the serious ones are very rare. These vaccines were carefully tested. All the vaccines went through clinical trials, randomized controlled trials. The FDA set up rigorous standards for the vaccine developers to meet. Diverse populations were tested, and there's a system in place to track problems or side effects, even beyond the clinical trials. There's expanded vaccine monitoring, and the safety data are continuously reviewed by the Food and Drug Administration, as well as an independent safety monitoring panel. Many people who are reluctant to accept the vaccine have expressed concern about how quickly the vaccine was developed and rushed into production. But just because it was made quickly doesn't mean that there wasn't time to implement safety precautions. So why were the vaccines developed so quickly? Well, for starters, the mRNA technology had been in use for years, basically preparing for other outbreaks. And so the manufacturing process was already ready very early in the pandemic. Second, China shared genetic information about the SARS-CoV-2 virus in January when it became available, which gave vaccine developers an early start at finding a vaccine. The testing process for his vaccine didn't skip any steps. These were very large randomized controlled trials. The governments gave the developers a lot of money so that they had the resources to do this quickly. And mRNA technology itself allows for faster vaccine production. Because of social media, they could reach out to and enroll study volunteers more easily. And because there were so many cases around, basically with lots of exposure, the trials took a shorter time to see if the vaccine worked. Finally, companies began manufacturing vaccines ahead of their authorization in anticipation of approval, so that they already had some supplies ready after authorization had been received. Okay, it's time to wake up. I hope you were paying attention earlier in the talk because we're going to have a quiz. Among people 60 plus years of age who had an underlying condition or comorbidity, such as diabetes or heart disease, which is the most effective vaccine? You got it. So Moderna was more than 90% effective among this high-risk group. Pfizer, 89% effective, whereas the Johnson & Johnson was only 42% effective. So that one would not be appropriate for our population. Next question. Arm pain following injection is most common with which vaccine? So 92% of people who received Moderna had arm pain, 84% of people with Pfizer, and 50% of people who received Johnson & Johnson. So if arm pain is not your thing, Johnson & Johnson might be the better vaccine for you. How often does fever occur with the COVID-19 vaccine? That's right. So Moderna, 15% of people would have a fever, Pfizer 14%, and Johnson & Johnson 9%. So it's wise to tell our patients that they may have a fever after receiving the vaccine so that they don't rush to the emergency room. How often do allergic reactions occur? So Moderna 2.2%, Pfizer 1.9%, and Johnson & Johnson just listed as rare. So I couldn't actually find a quotation. But again, an allergic reaction like a rash or itchy skin or something like that is a pretty uncommon side effect of these vaccines. Which vaccine may be associated with forming blood clots? So the Astrazeneca vaccine, there's concern for lower extremity DVTs, pulmonary emboli, as well as cerebral vein thrombosis. And that's why it's been on hold in several European countries, although looks like administration will resume in the near future. This disorder causes facial droop and may be a rare complication of COVID-19 vaccines. And is Bell's palsy. So this is actually not unique to the COVID vaccines. There are several vaccines out on the market for other conditions which have been rarely associated with Bell's palsy. This concludes the March 2021 Kent in service. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your month. This is Andy Broken Bro signing out.